Welcome to Hey Jude, What's Cooking with Brookline Access Television. Today I'm going to make scallion pancakes. Essentially, the first thing I want to make before I even make the dough is I want to make my scallion sesame soy ginger dipping sauce. And all it consists of is soy sauce, rice wine vinegar, sesame seeds, a little bit of cooking sherry, sesame oil, hoisin sauce, sriracha sauce, and of course the ginger and the garlic. So I'm going to go ahead and throw in a 1/4 cup of freshly grated ginger and a 1/4 cup of freshly minced garlic to start. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have equal proportions. So if you have a lot of people and you want to make 4 cups of sauce, you would use a cup, a cup, a cup, and close to a cup. But in this case, I'm going to make a very small batch. So I'm just going to use about a 1/2 cup of each. So we've got our soy sauce. By the way, you can use tamari if anyone is gluten-free. You can also use Dr. Bragg's liquid amino acids instead of soy sauce. It's made out of soy, but it has a complete essential amino acid buildup. So that's really, really healthy, especially for vegetarians who suffer from not getting all of their amino acids. And once again, if you've forgotten about amino acids, they're the building blocks of protein. So for vegetarians who don't eat meat-based things that have the complete proteins, they have to go out of their comfort zone to get a complete protein. So for example, rice and beans, wheat bread and peanut butter. But soybeans, luckily, are a complete protein. So soy-based things tend to be complete. So the cooking sherry, you can substitute cooking wine with cooking sherry if you don't have it. It's just a measure of diluting the soy sauce. So if you have no sort of cooking wines, you can just use water or even a broth. And I'm pretty liberal with the sesame seeds because this adds a lot of flavor. Let's open this guy up. And then the really fun stuff, which is the sriracha, that's the hot sauce. And of course you can moderate that depending on whether you like hot things or not. I like things a little spicy, so I'm going to put in about 2 tablespoons. And the hoisin sweetens it up. If you don't have hoisin at home, just use honey or a little bit of sugar. It does the same thing, and in this case we're looking for a sour, a salty, and a sweet. The sour, of course, is the rice wine vinegar. And then the sesame oil. And if you're worried or concerned about oil or fats, don't use a lot of it. Simply use a drizzle. You don't have to use a full 1/2 cup. A 1/4 cup is plenty. And the last thing I'm going to do is just take a couple scallions. I'm going to chop them up, take the beard off first. This is the root end, or the beard, I call it. And all I do is take that little end off. So you want to line them up, take that off, and then go ahead and thinly slice your scallions. Remember to have a claw. Try to make a claw with your hand so that the knuckles protect the tips of your fingers and they go underneath the knuckle. Therefore, you can walk your fingers back and never run the risk of cutting your fingers. So I'm just going to slice these up until I get to those ends. Okay, just gather them on your knife, put it in there. And the last thing I want to add, I mixed a little bit of salt and pepper together so it's a little bit easier. And I'm just going to throw a tiny bit of salt and pepper. You don't want to put too much salt in there because you already have soy sauce, which is terribly salty. But once again, you can use low sodium soy sauce or even tamari, which is gluten-free. I'm going to taste this. It's perfect. You want it to have a kick. It should have a lot of flavor. So the next thing, we're going to make our scallion pancakes. So I have to chop these up, chop up my scallions. So I'm going to bunch them up, take the beard end off, and then go ahead and just chop. Try to get them kind of on the thin side, so that they don't poke out too much out of the scallion pancakes rather. once again, gather them. Take the root end off, line them up, and then just slice as thin as possible. This recipe is actually inspired by Ming Tsai and his Blue Ginger cookbook, because he was the one that gave me the inspiration and the recipe for the sesame soy ginger dipping sauce. I did, however, change it a little bit, and I think most cooks do change things that are, for example, more interesting to them. So the rubric or the basic sauce is from him, and I want to give him credit for it. I also want to give him credit for the fact that he gave me this great idea to use melted butter rather than oil in making the scallion pancakes. His influence, even though he has an Asian background in food, he also has a French background in cooking. And so he uses butter as well as a lot of Asian principles or recipes. So that's why I thought this was a good one to play around with. It's very, very good. And actually, before Ming Tsai, I didn't really like scallion pancakes. So this is for him, although it's a little bit different, and hopefully he won't mind the fact that I've indulged in my own eccentricities and added things to it. Okay, so I've got my scallions. Basically, the next thing to do is the dough. So I'm going to put this aside, and I'm going to start my dough. The dough is really easy. It's just 2 cups of flour and 1 cup of boiling water. And then you add a little bit more flour to it as you put it in the KitchenAid. If you don't have a KitchenAid, you can just make this at home by making a well out of the 2 cups of flour, put a little salt in, add the boiling water in the middle, and then just use a fork and mix it all together. In this case, I'm gonna just do the easy thing and do 2 cups of flour. And then I'll take a little bit of extra flour. We call this bench flour, or extra flour for kneading. And then I'm going to add a little bit of salt to this, about a teaspoon. And then I want to make a well in the center. And this is important if you make dough at home, whether it's with a KitchenAid or not. It's a really good technique to make it easier. And then you put the wets in there and slowly add it together. So if you don't have boiling water on hand, just go ahead and use really hot water. That's fine. So I'm going to go ahead and place it in my KitchenAid, put the dough hook on, bring it up, and let it go. Now, that's all you need to do, and the only thing you need to remember about dough, whether you're making it by hand or you're making it in a machine, is if it's too wet, add flour. If it's too dry, add a little more hot water. And that's all you need to know about dough. The most important thing is that you knead it. And kneading actually extends gluten strands and puts them in a more orderly fashion. Gluten are these wonderful protein strands that we find in wheat. They're actually the reason that some people are allergic to wheat and have celiac sprue disease. They're not the reason they have the disease. They're the reason that they can't eat wheat. They cannot digest gluten. And some people are finding that they have strange, very mild gluten intolerances, so that they prefer to stay away from wheat in general. I've gone ahead and made a dough for us, so we didn't have to listen to the KitchenAid for a long time. And I'm going to start my scallion pancakes. Basically, I have my salt and pepper mixed together. I have my bench flour, which I'm going to put down so things don't stick. I have my rolling pin, and then the scallions. In addition, I'm going to fry them in a little bit of canola oil, which is over here. And once again, a la Ming Tsai, I'm going to use a little bit of melted butter. So we're going to cut these into even pieces. And then we want to make sure that all cut sides have flour on them so that it's not too sticky. Also, it's a good idea to, after you knead your dough, to let it rest for a little bit before you roll it out. Resting also rests the gluten strands. And the gluten's going to want to kind of pull back and start the rising process, and you don't want that to happen. So rather than fight it, just let it come to room temperature and rest a little bit. So now I'm going to basically put a lot of flour down and roll out my scallion pancake. And I want to get this as thin as possible. And I sort of imagine that this is a bicycle wheel, and these are spokes coming from the center. And in order to get a perfect circle, I have to go along the spokes. Now remember, it's easier to move dough than it is to move yourself. So feel free to turn your dough. Also try to go over the edge. You see that it's contracting. That once again is the gluten, but we can fight it a little bit and make it do what we want to do. So it doesn't concern me. It also doesn't concern me that it's not a perfect circle, because I'm going to roll this thing up again and roll it out again. So the first version, all it has to be is thin. That's all it has to be. And this is about as thin as you would want it. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my butter on it. Just brush a little bit of butter. Traditionally, sesame oil is used instead of butter. That's much more traditional for a scallion pancake. Any type of butter or fat or oil will basically create layers and will create a flakiness, such as croissant with butter, phyllo dough with butter, or even scones and other pastries, pie crusts that are made with flour and butter. So I've got a fair amount, and I've also kept a little bit, 1/4 of an inch periphery around the edge, because I know the butter is going to actually move outward as I roll it up. Then, oh wait, before I put my scallions, I have my wonderful salt and pepper mixture, and I have to salt and pepper it liberally. Otherwise it won't taste like much. It'll just taste like dough. Next thing, about a tablespoon. Be generous with your scallions. And then we spread these out. The next thing I'm going to do is roll it up. And I want to try to get it as tight as possible. The tighter I get it, the more rolls I have. The more rolls I have, the flakier it will be, because I'll have more distribution of the fat. So I'm rolling this like a little sausage. And also, I want to caution you to not get upset if the scallions poke out. Inevitably, the scallions will poke out. You can't be a perfectionist. So you're going to basically close both ends to prevent the scallions from wanting to go. And then we're going to make a concentric circle like a snail. So I'm going to basically put this together, pinch it, squeeze it together, and squeeze it on the other end. Okay? Then I'm going to push it down. When you buy scallion pancakes that are already made, you will see this indentation of a concentric circle, because this is how they're traditionally made. So I'm going to flatten it into a little bit of a disc shape, and if it doesn't look like it's adhering, just squeeze it together. Then I want to make sure I have a little bit more bench flour down, because I don't want that to stick. And now I'll start rolling it out. At the meantime, I'm also going to turn on my oil so I can fry at the same time. Okay, so a little bit more bench flour on the top. And now I'm just very, very simply going to roll it out gently. I really want to try to get it so that things don't poke out too much. I don't want to make a hole with the scallions, nor do I want the butter to poke out. So I'm just doing it relatively slowly. Now the the spokes from the center off to the edge, center off to the edge. And you see, as we get thinner and thinner, we see more and more scallions. That's very typical. And I am using some elbow grease to really push down and get this nice and thin. It's worth the extra wear and tear on your elbows, because If it's not thin enough, you won't have that crispiness that you really want with the scallion pancake. It'll be more bread-like or doughy, and that's not what we're going for. The other thing is how much oil to use. Well, you can just saute it on high heat with a little bit of oil and just get a little bit of crispiness. Or if you really want that puffed up, crispy scallion pancake effect, you'll put about an inch of oil so that you're able to submerge this. And if you submerge food in oil or fat, that is essentially deep frying. So you have to be aware of that. If you deep fry on the proper temperature, oftentimes there is a very negligible amount of extra calories or oil. People think deep fried food is so terrible, but actually the amount of oil that is taken in by food at the right temperature is quite small, and a saute could even bring more fat into the diet. But it has to be the right temperature. One of the ways that I tell the temperature, this is perfect. If you can see, it's quite thin. One of the ways, and some of my scallions have poked out, but that's okay. One of the ways I sort of check to see if my oil is the right temperature, well, first I do two things. I look at the surface, and I look to see if I can see the molecules moving, because what happens is, as the oil is heating up, the molecules on the surface are moving very quickly, and they create a rippling effect. It almost looks like if you're looking at a lake, a very calm lake, and it started to rain, and you were just able to see ripples. That's what it looks like. So you can kind of see it. I'm not there yet. The other thing that you can test it with is just a little bit of dough. People throw in water all the time, and that's, I think, a bit dangerous, because the water is actually forced out. You see, the water is not as hot as the oil, so that it ejects and you can get it in your eye or burn yourself. So what you do normally is you throw in a little piece of dough. Now I know for a fact, because I can tell, that this is not ready, but let's just see. It's not bubbling. What we're looking for is that whatever the food product is, and hopefully one without a lot of water, we would bubble immediately. Steam would be released from the food immediately. So I know for a fact that's not done. So I'm going to do another one while we're waiting. And by the way, the longer you let your dough rest at room temperature, the easier it is to roll out. It's not going to give you as hard a time. So for example, this one feels a lot less resistant to being rolled out than the first one, because it had a little bit more time to rest. Okay, there we go. And now I've got bubbles over there, so I'm doing pretty well. Also, do blend your butter a little bit. Make sure it doesn't solidify if you've just previously melted it. Okay, there we go. And then, of course, and then about a tablespoon of scallions. And then we roll up. The other thing I wanted to make you aware of is draining all of your fried food. It's really important to have paper towels on a sheet pan next to anything you're frying, so that when you take it out of the pan, you can immediately drain it on paper towel and get that excess grease off. So concentric circle all the way around. Pinch it so that it closes. Push it down gently. Make a sort of a flattened disc. Pinch it a little bit more. Make sure that sticks. A little bit of flour, and then we're ready to roll. Okay, and now I'm really going to push down on this and let this get nice and thin. The other thing is, you could always play with different things to add to these scallion pancakes. You don't have to just do scallions. I've done scallions and cilantro and a little bit of minced ginger and garlic. You can really play around with what you want to add. Pickled ginger's wonderful with scallions. So let your imagination kind of go wild. As long as you have the basic concept, add whatever you like. Who says a scallion pancake has to be only scallions? Okay, so now I'm getting it nice and thin. And I do have to tell people sometimes when they get upset about the scallions poking out that it's okay. It's a sign of a good scallion pancake. Now, I'm going to take this little bit of fried bit out, and I'm going to put in one more little bit of dough just to check to see if it bubbles immediately. And it does. If you notice, these bubbles are actually steam holes. It's steam that is leaving that food and going into the oil. Then what happens is the oil goes back into the food to cook the inside of the food through those steam holes. And that's what ends up really cooking the inside of your food. If you're cooking it at too high a temperature, the steam holes will go out and then it'll actually burn on the outside, and the good oil, the hot oil that wants to cook the inside of the food, won't be able to get in. So you'll have this raw middle and this burnt outside. So it's really important to have the balance. You can keep it on high, or you can actually, now that we've got it to the right temperature, we can bring it down to a medium high, which is more like a 7. And then I'm going to very gently, another thing I always try to teach people is no splash when it comes to frying oil. That hurts. So just very gently, you don't have to be scared of it. Just lay it in very, very gently. And then we're just going to give this a couple seconds. And one of the ways that I know it's appropriate to actually turn the fried food, whether it's scallion pancake or a piece of fried chicken or a donut, is I look for a light golden brown around the outside. I can see that. It's a very, very faint light golden brown. So I can pick that up and very gently place it down again. No splash once again. It's really important that we do things safely and that we don't hurt ourselves. Because if you hurt yourself, you're never going to want to cook again. And that's a shame. So there's a few things you can do to prevent the pain and the stain of flying oil. And I'm just lifting it up and sort of playing around with it, making sure that it's cooking evenly. I want it to sort of puff up. That's what I'm looking for. Not just the golden brown, but I want to make sure that it's actually puffing up really nicely. And it has. If you can look at that, these are some beautiful puffs. Really, really nice. So, I also prefer tongs as opposed to a spatula. I think it's easier when it comes to fried food. So, here we go. Next one in. And some people can actually use the side of their pan to slide things in. If you can see that. That's one way to, if you don't want to touch it in any way, you can use that edge. The nice thing about this dough is the fact that it's just flour and water and a little salt, and then scallions. So most people have that stuff at home. Most people can make something like this. And if you don't have scallions, substitute it. Use some onion or chopped garlic. Use cilantro. I mean, there's so many things. You could do olives. I mean, you could just make this really a fun thing. And interestingly enough, most cultures have some sort of fried dough, whether it's an appetizer or it's naan, or which is a fried bread that is eaten in India, or there's something called a sahi toast that's made actually also in India, that's like a sweet fried bread with sort of a honey syrup on top that I love. And this, we're looking for this really pretty golden brown. And we're also, see these wonderful bubbles that are created? Really, really nice. And very, very important that you drain it, okay? So that's about it for this demo, but I want to show you about serving it the way I like to serve it. Let me move things out of the way. so it's not too hot, is I like to put it back on a cutting board and cut it into wedges for people and serve it as an appetizer. I also serve it usually with 2 sauces in addition to the sesame soy ginger dipping sauce. I serve it with hoisin sauce and a little sriracha sauce. This is the sweet, it's a sweet bean paste, and it's sort of our equivalent to ketchup. Hoisin's used a great deal, and it's wonderful. And then sriracha is a red chili paste that also is a wonderful hot sauce, and it's not so hot, so that most people can actually tolerate it, even if they're a little squeamish about really hot stuff. So in terms of serving this, let me bring one over. And all you have to do is cut these into wedges. So people can eat them easily. Next one. If it's too hot for you to actually hold on to, just use a rag so that you can hold on to or a dish towel. It's a little awkward to cut holding it onto it with tongs, so I would suggest just a dish towel is nice, clean dish towel. Okay, and that's it. This is our scallion pancakes with our sesame soy ginger dipping sauce. And I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you try this at home. And I hope you got something out of this. Till next time with Hey Jude, What's Cooking, the ATV.